Mobile video games in the year 2023. Such a wondrous time to game on the go with such a variety of games in the marketplace of both respective platforms. Although filled with many experiences that aren't riddled with issues, modern mobile gaming is still undeniably a minefield where you must find a diamond amongst a dozen to actually have a tenable gaming experience. God, I still remember in 2012, despite barely being old enough to form more than two sentences at a time, that mobile games such as Subway Surfers, Angry Birds and Jetpack Joyride had their own unique charm to them. Hell, even Candy Crush managed to get its way into Wreck-It Ralph at some point, but sheesh. These developers were making these games as enjoyable as possible to ensure those with hardware both new and old could enjoy these experiences. Whilst these games are quite frankly fallen from grace, with one now having a fee and being recently discontinued because the parent company saw it as a threat to its unnecessary sequel, another in the form of Jetpack Joyride has recently become filled with microtransactions that are almost touted as a necessity to enjoy the game nowadays. As for Subway Surfers, that's mostly remained the same experience. Kudos to the development team for actually keeping it right. But did you really think I was here to talk about your grand score in Candy Crush and some of the more higher quality games in the market? Yeah, nah, they ain't happening here today. Instead, I'm here to discuss the slew of absolutely abhorrent mobile games that nowadays swamp the mobile market, riddled with ads and microtransactions that have set a rather depressing standard for today's requirements to build a game. Heck, given enough experience, I could probably make one of these horrendous games, as they're basically just clones of one another using the same source code. Yeah, how did we get to this point where mobile games and their advertisements are laughably bad? Was this a thing that spawned in 2020, or is this something that has been persistent for some time? Well, we're going to start answering that in our first chapter, which happens to be our discussion about these companies imitating IO games. I'm sure a lot of you have heard about games such as Slither.io or Agar.io. They rose to popularity sometime during late 2016 as well as early 2017 as a lightweight alternative to some more heavier games that existed on the market. These games were known as .io games or input-output games, representing the fact you were playing a game that was multiplayer and your inputs would be outputted on another person's screen. It was basically a nice abbreviation that led to it coincidentally being adopted as a domain for these style of games. Now, this isn't to immediately say that these games are bad, but I know some of you amongst the audience are already cringing thanks to the association with that suffix with some mobile games that exist out there. We're not there yet though, so stick with me please. These games relied on a somewhat basic server infrastructure that recorded your inputs, replicated and synced them up with other players, allowing for basic activities to be performed and logged such as collecting points, or in the case of Slither.io, being able to eliminate players by using your body to eliminate them by striking at their head. Crunker.io, a more well-known adaptation of the .io architecture, has a more complex system such as being able to set up accounts, a feature that a lot of these web-based .io games now have. But the whole point of .io in the first place and the domain was to represent that the game was multiplayer and somewhat competitive to a degree. Its use as a domain was somewhat easy to understand, thus integrating it with the game name made a lot of sense since you could easily type it into your browser before inevitably reaching the website. So Nadiva, why are you going on a ramble about .io games and the architecture behind them? Well, dear viewer, that's because in 2018, a somewhat new player known as VOODOO entered the mobile gaming scene and began to skew their view of what a .io game would be in the form of Whole.io or Wholio, because I like despite the developers like that. First of all, upon launch, this game lacked a website for it to be played on the PC, and to a degree, it does somewhat now, considering the website for it is barely operational, and more of this just shoves the fact there's a mobile rendition of the game. So what did VOODOO do? What's the eternal sin with them coming in with Whole.io then? Many videos out there have been made documenting this game's abhorrent use of advertisements as well as mild microtransactions to fuel the game's progression system. Not only that, several brave YouTubers out there have straight up debunked the fact that this game is massively multiplayer thanks to the use of AI assisted controlled players that can spawn and be played against inside of the multiplayer games, which somewhat defeated the point of playing against other people and the .io branding. I know botting was a common practice for these .io games, but they were mainly operated from third parties that weren't associated with the developers in any shape or form, whilst nowadays it's almost expected that you've got to use bots inside of your .io games, especially near the beginning considering nobody's going to be playing them if there's no players to engage with and interact with. This deceptive AI controlled players made people believe the game was more popular than it actually was, and upon viewing VOODOO's website you could see how shady it was considering their statistics are pulled from, well, not really credible incredible locations, and furthermore, you can also make the swift discovery of discovering that they're actually a publishing company that publishes these crappy games on behalf of other indie companies, as opposed to making them themselves. This logic also applies to some of their other games, such as Aquapark.io and Paper.io. Both games are basically unoriginal knockers of the other without any form of effort placed into convincing people that these games are not clones of one another in the first place. I know there are different development studios that were responsible for these games, but it's well known that code is somewhat widely shared amongst the indie game community, especially the Unity community, which is where most of these games are made. That's not a bad thing. Unity is a great development platform, and I've actually used it myself on multiple occasions. But as the fact that these mobile games openly capitalize on putting the trend of .io at the end of everything, only to further muddle the complexion of these games to a somewhat skew their original meaning alongside what they initially stood for. Plus, many of these .io games had somewhat intrusive ads that would pop up inside of similar games, as well as considering a lot of these games shared the same advertising assets in the form of the inbuilt Unity advertiser utility. VOODOO would publish these games on these developers' behalf, and then developers could collect a good majority of the earnings for these horrible games, with the VOODOO respectively taking a cut because they're the publisher, and that's usually an associated fee that people have to pay to the publisher. I know I'm singling out .io games to an extent, but this is where it all started from if we exclude Coin Master, but I'll get to that later, and VOODOO wasn't the only company taking advantage of this. You can literally type in .io, mainly inside the Google Play Store, as it's more unfiltered than Apple's App Store, and find a plethora of games that are somewhat unoriginal and knock one another off. Before 2018, I like to argue that there was a standard when it came to mobile games being developed. Sure, terrible games have existed since the dawn of some of the first commuting machines. I mean, just look at E.T. on the Atari. Ugh. Yet, during this year, and thanks to VOODOO's ability to attain popularity by having enough money in their coffers to constantly shove this game inside of your face, it became clear to many aspiring indie developers that they could just use this formatting of slapping .io at the end of some really terrible game and then ending up with a few months or even years worth of income at the expense of everyone's standards and some bad reviews. It's not like these bad reviews meant anything to these developers anyways. The mindset of seeing everything as a number somewhat emerged in this year as well. If someone downloaded the game and watched at least one advertisement, then that'd be a net profit for VOODOO or literally any indie game studio at the time. However, if I wanted to discuss all of that alongside the intense amount of advertisement that you see inside of these games, whether they be inside of .io formatting or not, I'll have to move on to the next portion of this video, which is our discussion about these games and their forsaken gameplay standards. Now, it would be unfair of me to brazenly disrespect or even critique these games without actually giving them a play for myself, so why don't we take a quick delve into that world? How bad could it be?
Just started to check out Hole.io as one of the games I'm reviewing, and you've got to love the screen. The supposed goal of this game is to like eat people. Pretty much it. You gotta eat stuff and like conquer other people. So you got other people here who are playing the game. I honestly don't think they're real players, to be honest, because this game has like been known to fake players inside of its game, so I don't really trust it. The gameplay's alright. It's like slightly buggy. Like the controls are a little bit hard to control, but that's pretty much it. You sometimes get auditory like advertisements. That's a pretty simple game, kind of addicting. That's pretty much it. It's not really too deceptive compared to the other game you're going to be playing. Yes, you got to love this screen again for pull the pin, so I'm going to accept that because I like selling my soul, of course. Wait for the game to load. It's probably going to take a while, so just give me a moment. Okay, never mind. Tap to play. So pretty much the soul of this is to like pull the pin, and that's pretty much it. And I'm pretty sure it will shove an advertisement in my face. Wonderful. You can even see the button at the top. Oh, lovely. It's calling me a nerd. Thank you. There's an advertisement down the bottom for Amazon. You can't see that because I cropped out the footage, but it's definitely there, people. So I played through a few levels now. You can see I'm on level 6, and well, the gameplay is pretty simple. I haven't really encountered any super intrusive ads or anything, but I can see ads at the bottom of the screen that keep cycling out of every single like aspect of the game that I play. So I'm pretty sure that's how this game's making its money. It's slightly intrusive, but it's not really as bad. Now on to our final game. Gotta love that at the bottom. Allow Twerk to send you notifications. I don't think I will. So this is a game that I've seen before, and well, judging by the caboose, oh my god, this game's laggy. Oh my god, I don't think I can show this on YouTube. If you're seeing a censored sign right now over the top of it, that's because this lady has a very big caboose, and well, this game is obviously, oh my the end, and you got like push this Well, this game is definitely a thing that exists. I'm not going to play any more of them.
What is wrong with these games? Why do people make these? Well, those are a few minutes of my life that I'm not getting back and can't unsee, but it seems a lot of these games were somewhat entertaining, albeit at the detriment of my brain cells. Although there is one massive issue that seems to be prevalent across all of these games and the studios that made them more generally, and that happens to be the abhorrent amount of advertisers that I was forced to interact with the entire time. I intentionally cut the advertisements from the footage of the gameplay alongside some of the more boring parts, as this is not a gameplay video and I don't feel like turning my video into a front for advertisements. But that's what these games are in my eyes. They are nothing more than an attempt to grab your attention and engagement to shove these ads in your face. A lot of these games are poorly coded as well, with a lot of the bugginess to be expected and many things held behind an advertisement or paywall. These games also feature shops to an extent that charge you an abhorrent amount for bonuses that barely last, as a way for them to ensure that your attention remains theirs in a sense. These companies are not concerned with how enjoyable these games are, they're more or less concerned with how much money they make by shoving advertisements in your face. Our first case happens to be our good friend Holio or Holder.io, which quite honestly wasn't all too harsh with the advertisements. I still counted a good 3 that I interacted with, but you didn't see me playing the game for a good 10 minutes. I did the same with all these games to observe some of their behaviours, although I completely tell that these games lack any form of multiplayer beyond the odd player here and there, alongside mostly relies on AI to do the heavy lifting. It wasn't an all-around terrible experience. The game used to be a front for advertisers years ago, but it seems like its business is mainly done by microtransactions nowadays, which is still bad, yet it isn't as distracting as advertisers being shoved in your face. So this second game I reviewed, Pull the Pin, oh my giddy aunt, this game was absolutely awful. So I'm someone with autism. I kind of enjoy satisfying things inside of games, whether it be a nice Call of Duty corpse launch or just enjoyable effects. It's quite visually pleasing for me. So to see none of what was advertised in this game was not only a horrible sign of what was to come, the gameplay was also clunky, and the advertisements, oh my goodness, the advertisements. I counted 13 advertisements in 10 minutes. I didn't even know that was possible. Imagine needing to deal with 13 advertisements on this YouTube video that's 20 minutes long. It was awful. Furthermore, the puzzle solving aspect of the game is intentionally designed to be flawed alongside clunky, in the hopes that you stick around in time for the advertisement timer to show a different ad on one of the banners that are down on screen. There's a reason why the footage was slightly cropped, and that's because, again, I don't want to turn my channel into a fronting page for ads that are quite frankly harmful to one's attention span. Also, with each level you solve, a new ad is thrown in your face, so butter my crumpets and call me Gordon Ramsay, as that's fun to deal with, right? As for our last game, as real of the ads as it was and as horrible as the gameplay was, at least from what you could see beyond the gradually senses of caboose, it was actually kind of funny. I can't tell if this game was made as a huge troll or not, and sure, the game shouldn't be praised in any form or manner possible, as it's clearly got some of the deserving motive to appeal to kids, of which probably connect with something I cannot mention on YouTube, but it's entertaining to someone as immature as myself, so I'll give it that. Unfortunately, one glaring flaw that all these games seem to have is the fact that they're made with an immense amount of simplicity in mind, with the aim of just grabbing your attention through manipulative graphics alongside colours, just so they can shove ads inside of your face. This is extremely harmful for children, considering it can lead to them downloading other forms of games, essentially trapping them inside of an echo chamber where companies profit from their ignorance to good games that exist and essentially allow that child to be exploited for advertisement revenue. It's clear by the flashy graphics and a relatively simplistic theme, not to mention how these games are primarily featured on kids' videos that theme around gaming, that these games are undoubtedly made for a young audience in the hopes of capitalizing on them in one form or another, whether it be the example mentioned above or to keep them downloading more games. Their aim is to convert that child into a piggy bank that plays through their crappy games, usually on their mother's phone or tablet. That's not to say all these games happen to be horrible or designed to manipulate. I mean, Royal Match came out as being advertised inside of these games and on YouTube, and although the game was slightly misleading as per marketing exaggeration, it ended up being a relatively clean-cut experience without much to complain about. Sure, the developers may reuse a few levels here and there, but the game is straight to the point. It doesn't feature too many advertisements, although some things are locked behind an obvious paywall. That's another thing I'd like to mention as well. The fact that many of these games feature absolutely ridiculously priced packs that are somewhat shiny, almost in the hopes that children that play the games will see what they can unlock, put it together in their head, and hopefully make a purchase using their parents' debit card. This practice is extremely predatory and should be shunned at all costs. That's why I'm a strong opponent to these games existing in the first place. They are made without any effort put into them, mostly rip the same code from online resources and depositories, are only updated for like 3 months at maximum before being deemed unprofitable as the development company moves on to developing other games that are similar to this in the hopes of capitalizing on their success. Branding matters very little. It's more about how flashy you can make your game whilst pouring in as little effort as possible, whilst using the publishers such as VOODOO as a front to publish your work and get everything out to a larger market. Furthermore, this mentality of developing games only for profit and simplicity's sakes means there's no innovation involved other than the psychological warfare involved to attain all of this attention. This is a harmful standard that has slowly but surely spread into the modern age through this endless torrent of low quality games, leading me to my final point, and that happens to be the collapse of standards these games are causing. Oh, I'm so sorry Clash Royale, as you're my proof that this argument stands for, as it's one of my strongest, and that's the fact that this game has undeniably been sucked up by a black hole regarding monetization madness. Once a flourishing game filled with potential on mere loot boxes, over time as these low effort games have gained popularity, even giants such as Supercell have been re-engineering their games in a predatory manner to favour those who spend money. If you'd like to learn more about Clash Royale though, you can click the info card above to watch 2 of my greatest videos regarding the manner whenever you'd like. This game is a bold subject of my scrutiny because these changes to the game's architecture emerged a mere year after the rapid popularization of these games and when these sorts of maneuvers were becoming common practice. Although the game is not riddled with ads, thank goodness, it is filled to the brim with microtransactions that put you at a competitive advantage compared to other players, something that would have not flown 6 years ago and something that would actively spawn a boycotting effort against the game. Furthermore, upon taking a look at Roblox, one of mobile games' biggest games out there for distribution and one of the most polarizing game development platforms that exist out there, you can observe a rapid uptick of games that are made with relatively minimal effort that are filled to the brim with microtransactions that you can purchase with Robux. These games on this specific platform, yet again, target children as its primary audience, with adults such as myself, despite being only 18, shying away from the platform and its predatory practices. Many creators have made amazing videos regarding Roblox and its increasingly predatory practices, a game such as Pet Simulator X being a great example, considering that game is riddled to the brim with microtransactions and released in around 2021 or 2022 I believe. Then again, this emerged around the same time VOODOO started popularizing and capitalizing on the .io trend, which is where we get to the startling discovery of the fact that all of these events have some form of correlation with one another. Standards usually move any industry, whether it be the technology industry and Apple making things more proprietary to maximize profits and compatibility with their own hardware, or if it be AAA developers rushing out their games and patch them later on just so they can receive that initial surge of profits. Heck, even the movie industry is being stingy thanks to the presently ongoing crisis occurring in Hollywood. These standards can sometimes be beneficial, but as of recently, they've started trending in a negative direction. Now, I'm not here to fault one development company for all of that, but it seems as if around 2018 was when companies realized that the interconnectivity of the internet could merely be capitalized on and to prey on the naive nature of their consumer base to maximize their profits. I'm sure you've also seen the deplorable prices of a graphics card made by Nvidia as of recently as well. This is one of those standards amongst many in the gaming industry that echoed out with a resounding gunshot in 2018, primarily thanks to VOODOO as well as Coin Master, and it's undoubtedly led to an exponential decline and even collapse of game standards. Nowadays, many inside of the generation above my own, even my own, look down upon Call of Duty and recall how great it used to be and how nowadays it's a shell of its former self, riddled with the instability issues as well as microtransactions. To this day, this mindset seems ever more prevalent thanks to the immense amount of mobile games that lack quality somehow and yet make it into the eyes of an audience, regardless how large or small that audience happens to be. These dreadful standards that emerged in this year specifically amongst the mobile market have washed away the true standards and pillars of what are meant to be a mobile game, to be unique, to be enjoyable, to innovate. None of that is happening in the present, and that's thanks to the collapse of standards that are snowball thanks in part to the abhorrent advertising practices these mobile games conduct, mixed in with how many copycats there are of the same game. It promotes a false sense of security, it skyrockets a phony trend into the stratosphere, and it convinces developers that this is the right thing to do, to put profits before the player base as opposed to developing a strong game that can be enjoyed by millions worldwide. Thankfully, some mobile games such as Clash of Clans happen to be somewhat immune to this microtransaction mindset. Sure, they're still prevalent, but they're not shoved in your face, plus the value of them is actually tenable as opposed to some other games that offer inflated prices for things that you'll run dry of in just a few minutes. Bring in examples such as Coin Master and you'll see what I mean by the fact that this has become a standard due in part thanks to them as well as VOODOO. I refuse to mention Coin Master unless in passing until now because they're a remarkable example of where this all began. I remember long ago when this game was being promoted by Morgs, drop a like if you remember that name, and this game would shove its microtransactions inside of your face. Like, here's some gameplay of your average experience logging into Coin Master sped up. Look at all the stuff that's shoved in your face upon logging in as well as to the size. No wonder why game development standards have been obliterated. Not only that, but this game also promotes a hazardous habit in the form of gambling to a young alongside impressionable audience. Yeah, this may be for another video considering the development as well as the current state of Coin Master is a rabbit hole so expansive to the point where I'm going to have to make my own video on the matter at some point. Nowadays, as it seems, making a mobile game doesn't hinge off whether or not you can make a game based on originality. It's now taking a trend, gamifying it to some degree, marketing the hell out of it with whatever spare funds you have and just hoping that you create a week-long trend so you can make back that money alongside profit. Rinse and repeat until you're successful enough as a game studio to make a good game or ride off into the sunset with all that money you gained. It's honestly insane how many of these games are able to gain any form of right to advertise, well some of these games that can straight up be promoted. Let's just say these games promote graphic and mature scenarios to young children watching these videos in the hopes of getting them to download. How do these advertisers get past YouTube's review system? Honestly, I have no clue, but this only furthers the descent into chaos that happens to be the standards of literally every indie mobile game developer. Sure, a good game will occasionally rise out amongst the ashes like a grand phoenix every now and again, but I remember when that wasn't an event you'd openly look out for and when you could actually look forward to seeing a new game being released. Nowadays it's just a sea of unoriginality, clones of those concepts erupting onto the market, and false trends are fabricated in the hopes of propelling these games forth in some form of campaign that would yield success for the studio at fault for creating these monstrosities. As for now, the situation will only continue to get worse whilst being shrouded in uncertainty as the world gravitates to a formula where money is more important than people. There's no doubt that the quality of one's gaming experience on a phone, or well, really universally, will be diminished for the sake of cutting corners to create an acceptable product as opposed to something revolutionary. This has been Nade while presenting the collapse of mobile gaming standards. If you enjoyed this video, feel free to support me in whatever way you deem suitable or check out some of my other content. Thank you all for watching and may the cosmos shine upon you.